Testing 1, 2, 3. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Today is a busy show. I say that all the time, but it thankfully really is true just about every single day. Mike Griffith coming up. We haven't had Mike on the show in a little while, so there's no telling what he will stir up, and we'll have some fun with that. We will look at some very interesting things that Kirby Smart has said about new quarterback at the UGA, Jamie Newman. We'll talk about that. There's some recruiting news out there, including the possibility that UGA could be on commit watch today. There is just a lot to get to over the course of the next few minutes, so let's not wait any longer to get it started. I'm a little late as it is, so let's get rocking and rolling here. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Georgia coach Kirby Smart has said some very interesting things about new UGA quarterback Jamie Newman. This is on an ESPN podcast. We will get to that. However, before that, there's some context I think that we need, and I want to set it up this way. You know, there's a clip that I've played for you a couple of times over the course of this summer. I thought it was interesting when it was first aired. It was ESPN's David Pollack going on the morning show there, Get Up, and during the program, he was touting Jamie Newman as a possible first-round pick. You've heard me play that before. I won't play it for you again right now. You've heard it, at least if you're a regular listener or viewer to the program. But it's the nature of that comment that has kind of created a little bit of a cottage industry, not against Pollack necessarily, but whether it be gambling community who puts Newman near the front end of the Heisman odds, or guy like David Pollack who says Newman be a first-round pick, guy like Greg McElroy who even kind of takes it a step further. We had Chip Patterson on the show from CBSSports.com. He and some of his CBS colleagues have touted the possibility that Newman could be a top 10 pick. There's this cottage industry that emerges around that of people saying, I'm not going to buy into the Jamie Newman hype. I'm not going to get into that. We had Barrett Sleeve from CBS Sports on the show on Thursday. He's kind of an example of that a little bit. Someone who's just not buying into that hype and not going to kind of go down that road. However, there is one thing that I think has always been kind of misunderstood about the Jamie Newman hype, that a lot of it actually predates the time in which Newman came to Georgia. Now, it's enhanced by being the Georgia quarterback. There's obviously, I said cottage industry about being anti-Jamie Newman hype. There's also obviously, a robust market that can be built around hyping up the Georgia quarterback, no matter who that Georgia quarterback is. You can look back through history and certainly see examples of that. But the thing that gets misunderstood in all of this, whether it be the folks who want to talk about Jamie Newman as, the next great quarterback in college football on par with the Trevor Lawrences and the Justin Fields and everybody else, or the people who say this is just a Wake Forest quarterback, stop saying those things about him. It's important to note that good things were said about Jamie Newman way before it was ever known that he was coming to UGA. Before we hear from Kirby Smart on Newman, some new stuff from him, let me give you an example of this. So in the ESPN podcast interview that Kirby Smart does, one of the guys that's a part of this is Georgia's David Pollack, or former UGA great David Pollack. He's a part of the Kirby Smart interview. And as I set up for a question to Smart about Newman, Pollack kind of goes into some detail of just how long he has liked Jamie Newman, going back to his time at Wake Forest a year ago. And I think this is really important. When you hear David Pollack on ESPN saying this is a first round pick, and you hear some of this kind of stuff, there were people who liked Newman when Newman was still in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Apparently, David Pollack was one of those guys. Let me give you an example from the ESPN podcast.
I remember when Jamie Newman, I remember watching him last year. Me and Kevin were doing a podcast, and we would bring up a baller of the week every week, and it was called, I think, what did you call it? David's Dude, Kevin? And and we would pick a guy, and Jamie Newman was my guy because I was watching this cat, and I was like, oh my God. I mean, he's got something special because he's big, he's physical, he makes downfield throws look easy. He runs, the zone read, basically follow, and just does all kinds of cool things and competed at a high level. And I just loved his competitive spirit. Now he's at Georgia.
So listen, I don't know what a baller of the week necessarily is. I don't know how sanctioned of an award that is, nor what David's Dude necessarily means. I don't know that that goes on the trophy case anywhere to be one of David's dudes. The point is not whatever official designation Newman got going back to Wake Forest a year ago from David Pollack. The point is he was noticed. And we've cited other examples of this as well. Different CBS writer who, last November, way before anyone ever conceived the idea that Newman could be at Georgia, last November talking about the idea that Newman could be a second-round pick in this most recent NFL draft had he gone out. That's based on just the Wake Forest stuff alone. So the point here is the pro-Newman hype folks and the anti-Newman hype folks, there's a degree of this hype for Jamie Newman, if you want to call it that predates his time at the University of Georgia, and I think that matters. Are you with me so far? Okay, so we got a chance to hear Kirby Smart in more detail on this ESPN podcast on the subject of Jamie Newman than we've probably heard from him thus far, including something that I think is really, really important because you miss spring practice, you miss a lot of the things that are typically a part of the college football calendar, and yet there are still things to do, still an opportunity for a quarterback to lead, and apparently Jamie Newman's been doing pretty well in that regard. Based on the words of Georgia coach Kirby Smart, here he is from the ESPN show.
Yeah, we're excited. Jamie's been a great addition to our program. We didn't really get to see him through the springs. We didn't get the spring practice, but we got to see him some in spring workouts. And the first thing that pops out at you is his leadership ability. He came into a situation where, he doesn't know a lot of guys on the team, but that hasn't hindered his ability to lead. In fact, he's graduated from Wake. He's number one, he's physically well put together. He's mentally well put together, and he's got the right mindset, and he's approached this thing the right way. That's not to say that, he's not going to have competitors coming in here. DeJuan's done a great job. Carson Stetson, JT, if he's, going to be able to play this year and be eligible, which we don't know yet, all those things are going to play a factor.
So it's obviously pretty interesting that Smart mentions all the other quarterbacks there, and I want to get to that in a moment. Let me spend 1 minute, though, on the first part of Kirby's comment there, saying that, hey, he's shown great leadership. He's a smart guy. He's going to come through the academic rigor associated with a place like Wake Forest. Here's the one thing I'm going to say about Jamie Newman that I don't think everyone that listens to me or watches me is going to agree with, but I'm going to say it anyway. Newman's got clearly the arm strength. We can see that on video. Newman's clearly got the athleticism that puts him in kind of the elite category. We can see that on video. He's not a perfect quarterback, and his time at Wake Forest wasn't perfect. But in terms of the arm necessary to be a good quarterback, you can just sort of look at it and see it. In terms of the athleticism that gives him an extra chance to succeed, you can sort of look at it and see it. There are intangible aspects that go along with being a quarterback that are not as easily noticed. How smart you are. Kirby Smart says we've been impressed with how smart he is. How willing and brave are you when it comes to being a leader? Kirby Smart just said there, we've been very impressed with that aspect of what Jamie Newman brings to the table. Therefore, if you've got the leadership, if you've got the intelligence, if you've got the athleticism, if you've got the arm strength, then I'm going to say that you've got all the raw materials necessary to succeed. There's no component of good quarterbacking play that you don't have. Therefore, if it doesn't happen for Newman at Georgia, if he plays but doesn't play well, then to me, I put it on the program for why it didn't get more out of Jamie Newman, because he's clearly got as I said before, the raw materials necessary to get that done. Smart acknowledging some of the intangible parts of that there, to me, only makes that more true, and I think that's kind of interesting. That's also obviously kind of interesting that Smart mentions Dwan Mathis by name and says he's doing well. Mentions Carson Beck by name and at least seems to allude that he's a part of this conversation. Also talking about the idea of JT Daniels, someone that we don't know yet how involved he's going to be, but to my knowledge, this is the first time we've heard Smart say anything about JT Daniels since coming to Georgia, and I guess maybe a little bit frustrating for Georgia fans that he wasn't pressed more on what Daniels' role is going to be in all of this for Georgia this year. More thoughts from Kirby on that anyway, but that's kind of the difference in doing a national interview as compared to doing a local interview, and why so many UGA fans like that local, stuff that you get sometimes from people who know the Georgia program just a little bit better than maybe someone at ESPN otherwise would have. But on the subject of Jamie Newman, there was more that Kirby Smart was willing to say. Let me let you hear that as well from ESPN.
I really like where Jamie's at. We liked what we were able to see last year. He did at Wake. I think he can create a lot of problems for defenses, and excited to see him go play. I think it's just so hard to answer that question without us seeing spring ball. That's the toughest thing in a year of transition being coordinator transition and quarterback transition. It's going to be very unique. And we're going to have to do a really good job of managing our practice time and our walkthrough time to make sure that we can take advantage of whichever quarterback ends up being the guy, but especially if it's him, that we can use his skill set the right way.
So listen, I think that's probably all true, and admittedly, sometimes I want to kind of gloss over what seems to be off-season concerns. Yes, last year I would have done that with experience the wide receiver position. This year, I might want to do that with the absence of spring practice and say that for the most part, no one had the full offseason they're used to getting. The absence of spring practice is not going to be that big of a deal for Georgia, but the honest truth is it probably is a deal. It probably does matter a little bit, and the fact that Georgia has so many new faces offensively, new coordinator, handful of new quarterbacks, probably means that it matters a little bit more. All the more reason for me to be excited about Newman, though, because as I told you on one of our shows a few days ago, it's the athleticism that he brings to the table. Those are easy yards, right? If yards are going to be tough to come by this year because you're transitioning so much offensively, then you better take some easy ones where you can get it, and a quarterback that can use his legs is certainly an example of that. Now, all of this is not to say that I don't think that if JT Daniels were eligible, he could be a great quarterback for UGA. Obviously, the credentials that he brings to the table speak for themselves. Same thing for guys that have been here, or at least we've known about for a while, longer. Carson Beck or Dwan Mathis, who truly has been on campus. This is not to say that I don't think they could also be good quarterbacks too. But admittedly, there is something about the profile of Newman that has always seemed really interesting to me. The stuff that you can see on film, the intangible stuff that Smart just says there that they're starting to notice, makes me excited about what he brings to the table. This quarterback competition is going to be a ton of fun, and if Daniels is eligible and everybody's healthy, my pick is still on Newman to win the thing. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev. We love being with our friends in the Classic City. In fact, I made an appearance on the morning show this morning. I do that every Wednesday with them. That's always really fun. Of course, podcast folks, thank you so much for your continued loyalty on podcast. It is such a pleasure to be with you. I know a lot of you, a little bit different kind of schedule right now. You're not driving the same commute you're used to, whatever else, but so many of you have continued to be so loyal to us from a podcast standpoint. I really appreciate that. That's a very, very special privilege for me to be inside those earbuds or however it is that you listen to our show. I just really appreciate you being with us, and thanks so much for making all of that possible. Let me also give a quick shout out to my friends at Kroger here for a moment. They got a big summer blowout sale that's continuing. A lot of you enjoying that time being outdoors. Kroger wants to make it easier for you to do that. How about these big-time summer savings on patio furniture, decor, summer toys, so much more? Over 50% off on that right now. So make sure you check that out as part of the summer blowout savings there at Kroger. All the stuff you need for being outside, the patio furniture, the summer toys, everything else. You can find more about that with our friends at Kroger. It's going to be Mike Griffith on our program here coming up in just a little bit. Before we do that, though, let me do some recruiting stuff here real quick, kind of round up some of this, including, I guess, maybe what one of the bigger headlines of the day is probably going to be around UGA. The idea that Georgia could be on commit watch this afternoon with a linebacker named Jamon Johnson out of the state of Maryland, obviously considering the Maryland Terrapins, but according to what he said on Twitter, he's also getting ready to make a commitment announcement. Let me show you Jamon Johnson here saying 2 p.m. tomorrow. Now, he said that yesterday for those of you watching a video, so that puts us 2 p.m. today for a Jamon Johnson announcement. If you want to find out more about Johnson, you can go to the forum.dawgnation.com, and there's been some interesting stuff, kind of written about him in some of the threads there. Obviously, Jeff Sintel's been talking about him on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. This is a little bit of a new name for us, admittedly, here on DawgNation Daily. Some of you, though, have been reaching out to me on Twitter the last couple of days saying, hey, BA, watch out for Johnson, maybe choosing between Maryland and UGA. So we will see if Georgia adds a linebacker to the class of 2021 here coming up. We'll also find out how that impacts some of the other guys at that position that Georgia's kind of chasing down here. But be on the lookout for a Jamon Johnson announcement, and just be very well aware this afternoon that Georgia is involved in this. There'll be more coverage of this coming up today at DawgNation.com. Make sure you check that out. Another announcement, although not a commitment announcement to be watching for, is one coming from the nation's number one player, Corey Foreman. Foreman, one-time Clemson commit. When he decommitted, there was a lot of wondering of how much does this open the door for Georgia. There's been some public overtures from Georgia towards Foreman. We've seen some of that on social media. It certainly has seemed like Foreman's been considering UGA there as well. We'll find out about the rest of that competition today, as Foreman says, once again yesterday on Twitter, that he's dropping his top 7 today. The expectation here is that USC will still be a part of this. I guess there's some online chatter about Oregon coming to play on this a bit too. It's probably fair to say that UGA fans that were feeling really good about maybe Foreman not all that long ago, maybe that arrow is pointing a little bit down right now. I don't want to overstate that necessarily, but that's certainly the sense that I'm getting from some of you that I interact with on social media, maybe not quite feeling as excited about Foreman as you once were, but still involved in the nation's number one player. And I guess in a roundabout way, still trying to figure out how much of a real connection there is about the idea that Foreman and a guy we talked about yesterday, 5-star defensive tackle from Louisiana, Mason Smith, do truly want to play with each other. So we'll kind of follow that. Let me squeeze in one more thing, though, before we get Mike Griffith. I thought this was fun from Lavassier Carroll. Carroll, who has just turned out to be one of the great fan favorites of this 2021 class, and Georgia fans love nothing more than when UGA commits are publicly recruiting for Georgia. Xavier Sori had a video, and Sori's a newly minted part of the IMG Academy and had some stuff out there on social media, and Lavassier Carroll was kind of doing a shout out of that, encouraging Georgia fans to continue to push Xavier Sori to show up there at UGA. That will not be a problem for Georgia fans. They are certainly excited about the idea of Sori, who it seems like Georgia still has a pretty good relationship with, and as we've said before, a high school program that Georgia's recruited well has been IMG. So that's kind of what's out there with recruiting right now. Some fun stuff with Lavassier Carroll pushing his high school teammate towards Georgia. A name to watch in Corey Foreman in terms of the top 7 that he drops, and then we'll see if Georgia truly is on commit watch later on this afternoon, and we'll do some catch-up in terms of learning about what Jamon Johnson brings to the table for the Dogs. All right, later on, we're going to have some fun with a couple of things. Kirby Smart showing a different side of himself on video, and kind of a conflicting message from something we heard last week on DawgNation Daily. I'll tell you more about that coming up. For now, though, let's talk to Mike Griffith.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So to Mike Griffith, we'll welcome him back to DawgNation Daily, really for kind of the first time in a while. Mike, as everyone should this time of year, enjoyed some vacation time last week. Mike, I trust it was a good one for you. I don't know if there's going to be any videos of you running shirtless on the beach the way that we saw from Kirby Smart here over the last few days, but whatever you did, I hope it was fun for you.
Yeah, I saw that video, but yeah, I wondered if anybody would confirm that was real and timely. But yeah, it looked like Kirby was having fun, and as hard as those coaches work now with 24/7 news cycle and the way recruiting runs year round, it was good to see the head coach getting a little bit of a break.
Yeah, listen, I mean, of all the things that I thought could happen for Georgia football this summer, Kirby setting a thirst trap on social media was not really one of the things that I thought we'd be seeing there, to be honest with you.
No, but it just goes to show life goes on, and everybody's trying to make the most of this difficult time and get through it until football season starts here in about a month or two.
All right, so let me talk about something that I talked about before you joined us. I thought some interesting comments from Georgia coach Kirby Smart on an ESPN podcast where he addressed the leadership that he's seen thus far from Jamie Newman. And, Mike, this is why this matters to me. I can watch Newman on film, and I'm not a trained scout, but I can watch Newman on film and say, oh, well, he clearly throws the ball as well as a good quarterback should be able to throw it, and he's clearly got the athleticism that gives him an extra chance to succeed. You don't need to be, trained scout to necessarily notice that from someone. Newman's got the raw materials in terms of the athleticism. Some of the intangible stuff, though, could go a long way towards determining how good a quarterback's going to be. When I hear Smart on an ESPN show praising the Newman leadership, to me that feels like another box checked about who this young man is. Now, Smart also mentions Carson Beck, and he mentions DeJuan Mathis, and he mentions the possibility of JT Daniels. So I'm not going to, give short shrift necessarily to those other guys. But hearing Smart say something positive about the Newman leadership, that matters to me.
Oh, and it should, and obviously a couple weeks ago when they did that video for the boosters and Jamie Newman was one of the 3 players selected to talk, I mean, that was the writing on the wall that Jamie Newman had done enough to assume that lead and that he was indeed someone impressing Kirby Smart. I would almost argue that leadership is the most important characteristic for a quarterback, because if everyone doesn't believe in that guy leading the huddle, it doesn't matter what the play called is. And I think this is something that had not been established through the first couple of months before COVID forced cancellation on March 12th. So the fact that Jamie Newman has returned to campus and provided a leadership presence since the beginning of these voluntary workouts on June 8th, I think that's big, and I think it's important, and I do think it's notable.
Let me talk about something else here just for a moment. There was an interesting thing in Sports Illustrated the other day. Albert Breer was the writer looking at some seniors around college football that had gotten some draft grades, and a couple of the Georgia guys that got mentioned from Breer were Monty Rice and DJ Daniel. And, in Rice's case, this is obviously a guy that I think we kind of know what Rice brings to the table. When he's been healthy, he's been one of Georgia's most important players. I wouldn't put him in the kind of wow category the way that I think that Obviously, Roquan Smith once was, and the way that a guy like Nakobe Dean might one day be. Rice is just a little bit different than that. He's just more, consistently solid, always seemingly getting the job done, not necessarily dazzling you with the highlights, and I think we kind of understand that about Monty. But it's the presence of DJ Daniel here that I think is really interesting, because we saw a lot of Daniel last year because, unfortunately, Tyson Campbell was dealing with an injury. And it wasn't a perfect season for Daniel, kind of like it wasn't a perfect season for Campbell when he was playing a lot in 2018. But clearly we know that Daniel runs well, and seemingly now also getting the attention of some NFL scouts there as well. When we talk about a very deep and talented Georgia secondary, making sure we talk a lot about DJ Daniel is probably a pretty important part of that discussion, is it not?
I think so, especially with Keely Ringo coming on and Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell returning to help. I mean, I think you have 4 future NFL cornerbacks right there. And, DJ Daniel was the guy that, as you said, kind of came in and quietly got the job done. It was DJ Daniel in pass coverage there to knock the ball down on that Notre Dame 4th down pass in Georgia territory. After a shanked Jake Camarda punt put the Irish in position to steal one. What a letdown that would have been. But DJ Daniel made a big play there. And, of course, the second half of the regular season, Georgia didn't give up a play longer than 40 yards, and you got to give DJ Daniel a lot of credit there. We don't talk about him as much as we have Eric Stokes because he was a junior college transfer, but he quietly came in and made a huge impact. It was another example of Kirby Smart finding a transfer that could contribute immediately. And, a couple of important ones coming in this year with Jamie Newman and Trey McKitty. So, to your point, though, B.A., I do think he's going to be important in that secondary. A lot of these teams you play, such as Alabama, are going to go multi-receiver, and there's a chance you could have 3 cornerbacks on the field at one time in certain packages.
Oh, yeah, I would think you'd probably have that a lot. I also think it's true, Mike, sometimes we talk about, how the national media views Georgia and who it maybe underrates in the Georgia roster. I do think there are examples that sometimes with UGA fans underrating their own players sometimes, and I do think that Daniel is one of those guys. Monty Rice may be slightly an example of this, but for the most part, people know what Rice brings to the table. But I do think that Daniel is one of those guys that sometimes UGA fans themselves may be just a little bit guilty of underrating at times.
Well, cornerbacks are like umpires. They're at their best when you don't notice them. And, frankly, we didn't see DJ Daniel get beat a whole lot. Didn't see Eric Stokes get beat a whole lot. In fact, we didn't see the Georgia secondary get beat a whole lot. As I said, the whole second half of the year, they didn't give up a play longer than 40 yards. To me, that's an absolutely remarkable statistic. South Carolina had one, but that was a short pass, and they were able to outrun, I believe it was a nickelback in that situation. I think Mark Webb also got beat early on a slant by a pretty talented Arkansas State receiver. So it doesn't happen too often. When it does, Kirby notes it. He brought up Richard LeCount getting beat by the tight end on a seam route. It's amazing I can sit here and name the handful of occasions because it just doesn't happen that much. Another football team, conversely, could have all those plays in one game. For Georgia, it happens over the course of the season. So I do think, though, that fans oftentimes will fall in love with recruiting rankings and preconceived notions and look for things to back up those recruiting rankings rather than looking at the stark reality of what the players have done. And that may be a reason why a guy like DJ Daniel got overlooked, because he wasn't as celebrated during the recruiting process as others.
Well, speaking of guys highly rated in recruiting, you wrote yesterday at DawgNation.com about some guys who could be ready for some big jumps, big leaps in terms of productivity, maybe even attention in their second years at Georgia. Most of those guys, have said before, kind of come from that rank of elite recruits that Georgia's recently signed. Let me start with the top name at the top of your list, and that's George Pickens. And obviously Pickens is a guy we talk about here on DawgNation Daily all the time. And I guess, Mike, for me, one of the big questions that kind of faces Georgia with Pickens this year is, how do you make sure it really is true that he goes to that next level of where he's supposed to be from a statistical standpoint, knowing that basically every defense that he's going to face is also aware of this too, and they're going to be doing everything they can to stop Pickens? How does Pickens still have a great season knowing that's the case?
Well, number one, he's got to earn the trust of his quarterback. Him and Jamie Newman or him and JT Daniels or whoever ends up under center, there's got to be a trust factor there. There's sometimes, some players you'll throw the ball up and trust 50-50 situations, and others, you're going to shy away from. But George is a guy that can high point the ball, that can make a difficult catch. Last year, Jake was willing to put the ball outside the window a little bit where only George could get it, knowing that George could make those catches. There were no drops. A lot of this is going to have to do with quarterback accuracy. If Jamie Newman can throw it into tight windows, then double coverage isn't an issue, because you know that George is going to outfight people for the ball or come back for the pass. Not all receivers do that. There were some receivers last year that you could attribute to receivers either going off their hands. Tyler Simmons against South Carolina, not coming back for the ball or turning the wrong direction. Matt Landers. George Pickens isn't one of those dudes. I mean, he is a generational talent. He's a guy that Todd Monken will scheme for and find ways to get the football to because he is a special player.
Another group of guys you kind of mentioned, we talk about these guys seemingly together a lot. It's a lot of those rising sophomores on defense. And, it's a Nolan Smith, it's a Nakobe Dean, it's Trayvon Walker. These are all the five-star type guys. Lewis Seen was a very highly rated safety. They are all sophomores that played last season and really showed you a lot of flashes when they did play. And now I think it's time, Mike, for some of these guys to become true household names, the way that like a Derek Stingley would have for LSU a year ago, or you can think of your own examples of that, of guys who, really become, to the extent that, college football players are going to be a celebrity type player, really become well known beyond just the borders of Dog Nation. When you look at Trayvon Walker, when you look at Nolan Smith, when you look at Nakobe Dean, Lewis Seen, who you mentioned, how do you handicap those individual players' chances of really breaking out of just a complimentary figure in kind of an ensemble cast of defense, but to give Georgia the sort of superstar performances it needs for this defense, I believe, to take it to the highest level?
Yeah, Dean's an exciting guy because, he played with a sore ankle that he had a high ankle sprain in camp and really wasn't 100% until midway through the year. And even then, he was only playing third down. Tay Crowder was starting inside. So I look at Nakobe Dean as a guy that can be an every down player, and I think his production will jump dramatically. He's a very productive guy. He's not just out there making tackles. You were talking about Roquan Smith earlier, and I think Nakobe's a guy that can force turnovers, that makes things happen. He's instinctual. I think this is a guy to be really excited about, maybe even a potential future All-American. Lewis Seen's going to have his hands full with Tyreek Stevenson and other safeties back there. You mentioned the depth and the talent back there. Lewis is a guy that's got to get bigger. His playing rate was 185 last year. But, boy, he was everywhere on the field. And you look at the production in the last two games when he started 6 tackles in each one of those games, playing behind JR most of the year. But this is a guy who's smart. This is a very complex system that Kirby runs, and I think that really gives Lewis a chance to hold that job even with the talent behind him. And Trayvon Walker, is just indisputable talent. We saw that on the kickoff team. I think Connor Riley was one of the first to know Trayvon Walker on the kickoff team. My goodness, can you imagine seeing a 285-pound guy that can move like Trayvon Walker? And then he overcomes a broken wrist in surgery mid-season to make one of the biggest plays of the year against Auburn on that final drive. It's Trayvon Walker out there sacking Bo Nix. So he's an exciting force. He's a future NFL player. Nolan Smith, BA, this is interesting to me because, Kirby said before you almost have too many outside linebackers, but you just think there's got to be a way to get this guy in the field. Aziz Ojulari earned the starting job, fair and square. I don't know if Aziz is going to do anything to give it up, but you got to find a way to get guys like Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson out there. I don't know who you take off the field, but there's certain sizes and weights you want. Do you take Malik Herring off the field? He's the highest rated defensive lineman coming back. Just exciting that Georgia has this sort of depth. We didn't mention Adam Anderson, third down pass rush. They have so much depth at this position, and as long as Nolan Smith's okay with it and Jermaine Johnson's okay with it, these opponents and these linemen got to be looking at it like, wow, here comes another one. Here comes another one. This makes Georgia's defense that much better.
Let me speak as a fan for a moment and not an analyst. I'm a big believer that the best version of the Georgia defense, with all due respect to Richard LeCounte or Eric Stokes or Tyson Campbell or anyone who might emerge, if the best player on this Georgia defense this year is someone in the front seven as opposed to someone from the secondary, to me, that's the best version of the Georgia defense. A year ago, I would argue that J.R. Reed was this team's best defensive player. He was an AP All-American. In 2018, DeAndre Baker was clearly the best player on this defense. He was the Thorpe Award winner. But in 2017, when Roquan Smith had one of the great single seasons any Georgia player has ever had, that was the best, most impactful version of the Georgia defense thus far in the Smart era. That's not a perfect scientific corollary necessary, but if one of the guys you just mentioned, a Walker or a Smith or a Dean, if they step up, kind of become the superstar, or if it's one of the guys who's kind of been here for a little bit longer who kind of does that, if Georgia is led defensively, both statistically and spiritually, if it's led by someone from the front seven, I believe that's the highest and best performance possible that the Georgia defense can provide.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd love to see it be a linebacker. And, to your point about Monty, he's a little on the short side as far as NFL products go. He is a guy that gets it done. He's an inspirational leader. He's a motivational leader, but not necessarily a playmaker. And you need a playmaker there. I think of Clemson's Isaiah Simmons as a guy that really anchored that defense. When you think of Clemson, you don't really think of defense, and yet that was a pretty special guy that could play all over. He was their version of Roquan Smith. I mean, Georgia needs that. I agree. You can have dominant defensive linemen, but you can scheme away from defensive linemen. You can avoid running into Jordan Davis, Julian Rochester in the middle, or you can avoid, Malik Herring's side or Travon Walker's side or Azeez Ojulari. You can scheme away. But a good linebacker, you can't really scheme away from if protected by his defensive line, and he's able to read the plays and understand his pre-snap reads and has the good instincts to recover. And I'm with you. I think the guy needs to be Nakobe Dean. I think Nakobe Dean needs to be who we think he is. I think he'll be starting. He didn't start last year. I think he'll be healthy. He had the high ankle sprain. I mean, there's a reason Georgia went to Mississippi to get this guy. I think he has the potential to maybe be that special player that you're talking about, Brandon.
Yeah, let me squeeze in one final thing before I let you go. The other name that you mentioned in your piece on the second-year players was Kenny McIntosh, the running back. I think McIntosh fits into a competition that's obviously going to include Zamir White. It's going to include James Cook in some form or fashion. Kendall Milton steps in as a freshman. Dejon Edwards there as well. How do you think McIntosh fits into that competition right now?
Well, I think it's a running back by committee, more so than even the last 3 years. I don't think that there's one that's head and shoulders. At least I haven't seen that from Zamir yet. I thought he had a good Sugar Bowl, not a great one. But again, he was still coming off that knee. This could be a really big bounce back year for Zamir White. Even so, you don't want the guy to carry it more than 20 times a game. That's not what Kirby believes in. The platooning keeps everybody fresh, and at different times you need different players. I thought 2018 was an example of that with Elijah Holyfield and Swift and Brian Herring, kind of sharing the load there. I kind of see that happening. You need to have that good number two. Let's say Zeus rips off a 34-yard run. You need to have that guy you put in there for first and 10 that can get you 5 to 7 yards. I thought part of what made 2017 Georgia so devastating was Chubb and Michelle. They could just absolutely carve you up. And when one was off or when one was banged up or maybe one was winded, the other one came in, there was zero drop-off. And I think it's important that Kenny fills that role because you said something interesting a moment ago that I agree with. James Cook in some form or fashion is a nice way to suggest that maybe more of a third down back and pass catcher. That's what I believe also, just based on what I saw last year and what his attributes are. So if you're looking at Cook to kind of play that role that Swift played as a freshman, maybe the incoming freshman as well plays that role, Edwards, that would leave Milton, McIntosh, Zamir you're between the tackles runners. And we just don't know enough about Milton yet, other than his incredible physique. We don't know how he's going to compete at an SEC level. I think it's very important that Kenny's able to fill that number 2 role entering the season and be there in case Zamir does get banged up again. He does have an injury history, so very important to have a guy behind him that could be ready to take the reins.
All right, Mike, it's good to have you back in the saddle. Welcome back from vacation. We appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon as well.
Appreciate it, B.A. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
On the subject of Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson for a moment that Mike was mentioning there a little earlier, I think that Nolan and Jermaine were on the field plenty. I don't see snap counts and things like that. I don't have the patience required to do snap counts either. But if you looked at snap counts, Nolan and Jermaine Johnson are playing plenty. It's one of the things that Kirby Smart does really well. Kirby gets a lot of snaps for a lot of people. Yeah, Ojulari had the better stats, but it's not like Nolan and Jermaine weren't on the field plenty. I think the next thing for Georgia to do, and let's just be honest here for a moment, if this doesn't happen, it is going to hurt Georgia recruiting a little bit. For these elite players, elite prospects that are on the field a lot, you got to find a way to get them more stats. Nolan and Jermaine both had 2.5 sacks a year ago. I think Azeez had 5.5. Am I right about that? You got to find a way for all of those guys to go up. I've been shouting this to the heavens for as many years as I can remember. Georgia's got to kind of try to find a way to eclipse that 40 sack number to be as impactful as the best teams in the country are when it comes to that particular metric, and to give guys a chance to believe they can come to Georgia and have the big-time statistical performances. If that's not happening at UGA, it'll eventually be noticed. Now, I think that this year's defense really has a great chance to make that be the case. But I do think you need to say that for the guys who are on the field, and by the way, both these guys were so close to some big-time plays a year. I'm talking about a fingertip away from really making a big play, adding more of those numbers. This needs to be a much more robust statistical year for a lot of the guys that we just mentioned. There's certainly a chance that's going to be the case. Let me SEC through here. Mention what we talked to Mike Griffith about a moment ago. Albert Breer, who was writing for Sports Illustrated, gives some information here that I guess there's a group that gives some draft grades to college seniors before they start their year. The truth is, I don't understand all of this and probably don't care that much about it one way or another. But let me give you a little context. So if you get a 9.0, that means you're a first overall pick, future Hall of Famer. 8 to an 8.9, that puts you in the top 10. 7 to 7.9 means you're a first round. Then after that, you're talking about late first, second round, or second and third round type grades. And so here's some people. Highest graded guy given a grade right now, Trey Smith, got a 6.91. Obviously, the story with him is I thought his career might be done at Tennessee, dealing with some health issues, blood clots, things like that. He's been able to kind of figure all that out and gotten a very good grade. I mentioned that Monty Rice got a grade. Devontae Smith got a 6.51. So that gives that gives him kind of a late first round type grade. You remember Nico Collins, former receiver that Georgia was involved with in the recruiting trail, went to Michigan. He got a 6.52. I mentioned before that DJ Daniel got the 6.01. Same grade as Najee Harris, for what it's worth, by the way. That's kind of interesting. That puts him in that sort of late second, third round type situation. Monty Rice's grade just a little bit higher than that in terms of where he's expected to go. So you can literally do with that what you will. Rice got the 6.21 grade. So once again, that kind of puts you in that sort of second, third round conversation. So if you're kind of I've said this before, but if you look at LSU from a year ago, 10 players selected in the first 3 rounds. That's very important to me. You've got to have those top-end first half of the draft type guys win a national championship. And a couple of guys that are getting some of that consideration right now, at least according to Sports Illustrated, is what's going on there with DJ Daniel and Monty Rice. I thought it was interesting that Leonard Taylor's got his top 5 out. He's a 5-star defensive lineman from down in South Florida. He is down to Miami and Florida. That's his top 2. Georgia seemingly has not really been involved with Taylor much now for a while. The top 2 here includes Miami and Florida. Part of this is interesting to me because we have seen Miami seemingly kind of emerge as a player for James Williams. That's a player that Georgia is heavily involved with. Williams kind of has considered Miami in a way that earlier he was. Remember, when Williams released his top 3, Miami was not a part of that. But they are now a part of his top 2, also making the top 2 here for the big 5-star defensive lineman as well. Does this mean that Manny Diaz and the Hurricanes are about to be more of a player on the recruiting trail? That obviously changes the fortunes for a lot of programs. If that's indeed true. It's also, I guess, honesty compels you to admit here, fair and balanced, an example of the kind of elite recruit we don't typically see Florida talking about. But apparently Florida in the mix here for right now. One final story. The Alabama assistant coaches go through basically a health check every single year. Something kind of popped up on Steve Sarkisian's, and then because of that, he had to have an off-season surgery associated with his heart. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea. It sounds like they're expecting a full recovery for Sarkisian. So, but Sarkisian did have a little bit of a health scare here this offseason. Apparently, that's been reported coming out of the state of Alabama that he had some off-season heart surgery that he had to deal with there. So, prayers to him for speedy recovery. It's also a quick reminder here, Sarkisian is still a pretty big name OC for Alabama. And I think that for all the turmoil and the unrest that Alabama's had on the defensive side of the ball, a lot of fans not happy with Pete Golding. A lot of fans before that were certainly not happy with Tosh Lupoi. There has been more stability than you realize with Alabama on its offensive coordinator side. Either Saban making good hires, or give him credit for Brian Dable, that worked out well, or being able to hold on to Sarkisian, who had some considerations for some head coaching jobs over the course of the offseason. So that comes to mind when you mention Sarkisian's name. We'll make that your SEC through. Here on DawgNation Daily, just for a minute, I want to kind of go back in time. Now, a lot of you were not happy with CBS Sports' Barrett Sallee when he joined our show last Thursday. Barrett's a friend. This is all in good fun. Some of y'all were not happy with some of the things that Barrett had said about Jamie Newman and some of the evaluations of Georgia in comparison to the how Georgia's going to fare against Florida in the SEC East. And all of you have a right to express that opinion. And many of you were certainly plenty eager to express that opinion with me. However, today I have a different bone to pick with my good friend Barrett Sallee from CBS Sports. At the end of our interview on Thursday, I asked Barrett how he was feeling about the idea of college football, just given all the crazy stuff that's out there, doom and gloom from some pockets of the media about football taking place. And Barrett struck quite an optimistic tone. Here is CBS Sports' Barrett Sallee going back to Thursday. Where's your level of optimism at the moment?
It'll take place. If you look at every metric that matters in terms of COVID, everything sort of trends to younger people getting it and death rates continuing to plummet, which has been the case for about a month now. And if younger people get it and move on, which is what the vast majority of people are having right now, then I just can't imagine why. If the reason is liability purposes, then okay, that is a reason that I think a lot of folks are worried about. But if it's a public health issue, I think the public health issue is improving dramatically, despite what cable news is saying. And by early August, you will see this basically filter through the entire country. And if that means the season gets delayed, then okay, but it'll be played. There's no doubt in my mind.
So listen. First of all, it's not my place to say what the current coronavirus stats say about where this is going. I'm just not even going to go down that road one way or another. But the overall bottom line from Barrett is, hey, do you feel optimistic about the season? Yes, I do. The season's going to take place. Well, lo and behold, my good friend Barrett Sallee goes on the CBS Sports. I guess I forget what it's called, like All Access or whatever else. Same question, ironically, also from a reporter host named Brandon. This is yesterday, like 2 days after what he said on DawgNation Daily last week. Very different answer from Barrett Sallee. Take a listen to this.
Your confidence level that college football will actually play in the fall.
And I'm pessimistic today, and that's not because I'm a pessimistic guy by nature. I just think when you see baseball players opting out, when you see more positive tests coming in for football, when you see questions about MLS and basketball and the NHL, it just feels like one of those weeks like we saw in mid-March where a lot of decisions are going to be made, and for the future of sports, it doesn't look very good. So, if you had to ask me right now, I say we're not going to start on time in the college football season. Ask me tomorrow, though, might be a little bit more optimistic.
All right, so in fairness here, in both clips, Barrett does say that at least there's the possibility it doesn't start on time. But the larger point, how do we go from, oh, yeah, it's fine, the season's going to take place, to just a couple of days later, no, I'm pessimistic here today. This is the thing I feel like we got to try to do on stuff like this. We can't get caught up in like the roller coaster of the news cycle. One of the things I feel like we do pretty well around here is, and there's plenty we do wrong, and some of you are good enough to tell us about the things that we get wrong or do wrong or anything else. But one of the things I think we're pretty good about is we don't really ride a roller coaster of emotions very much. We were kind of high on Jamie Newman when JT Daniels came in. That didn't really change the opinion of this show very much. Still had a lot to like about Jamie Newman, even with the presence of JT Daniels. The same thing when it comes to the coronavirus there as well. We have been of the belief that the season is going to take place. And every time some news comes out that seems to conflict that, I'm not going to run and hide under the bed just because a few Clemson players, tested positive, for the virus. Nor am I going to do, a celebration dance because Notre Dame announced yesterday they tested a bunch of people and none of them, got it, because I think all of this kind of falls within the sort of range of statistical variance, and none of it necessarily means all that much. Barrett's a friend. I'm obviously having some fun at his expense right now, but I think we got to be really careful about getting to one way or another of any of this. A lot of people will tell you, time is no longer on college football side. It's getting late. They've got to make some decisions. I think that's overstated by a national media that simply just wants something to write about. They simply want to cover the apocalypse if it's going to happen because they got to have something to write about here. There's still time. There's still data to be sorted through, and there's still, I would say, more good than bad news. You just got to kind of look to see it, and you kind of got to not get too stressed out about it one way or another. There's still time for some good news to take place on all this front, and if I'm predicting, I think that's exactly what will eventually happen. So on a very different story to kind of close things out, I mentioned this with Mike Griffith a little earlier, or at least it came up with Mike, the Georgia TikTok video of Kirby Smart running on the beach. First of all, I got to give him a ton of credit here. To be competent enough to essentially put out a video of you see him high-stepping there, for those of you watching watching on video, running, racing against his son. I don't think there are, how many SEC coaches would be willing to be shown without their shirt? Orgeron is shirtless half the time. Kirby here, I'm not even sure there's another SEC coach that even be willing to do this. You think Jeremy Pruitt's going to show up with no shirt on? Gus Malzahn, Dan Mullen? I got to give Kirby a little credit for here. A little good bit of confidence on Smart's part. Georgia TikTok, no shirt on. Gatorheader Updater, 1,348 days. Thanks for being here as a part of DawgNation Daily. Hope all of you have a great day. Stay healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow and on video. Time now for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll take your comments about anything you want to discuss from today's show. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews does all of that for you. And if your air conditioning goes out, well, they can replace it for you. But really, R.S. Andrews is a great resource to use to keep it from going out, right? Before it's on its last legs, what you can do to, prevent that from happening. Get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. I'm telling you, there's a guy, every neighborhood's got a guy that's like the ultimate handyman. The version of that in my neighborhood told me the other day that he gets his air conditioning tuned up every single year, and he has for every year going back. That's going to be all I need to know. And there's somebody better for doing that for you than our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. So we can talk about what you want. I got vacation coming up in a couple of weeks. You will not be seeing any kind of video of me running shirtless. I am not confident enough to do that, nor do I think I ever will be. But good for Kirby. Good for Kirby. Clearly, one of the things that kind of came up during the coronavirus lockdown was he was in like the weight, loss competition, whatever else. Apparently Smart took that pretty serious and wanted to show that off on TikTok, and I ain't mad at him for it. So from that standpoint, let's pop over here and ready to take your comments. And I will click on this Facebook video 57 times until it finally shows up, and we'll see if we can get your comments to kind of show up on that too. I really hate Facebook's new interface, but there it is. Philip Jordan Wells says it was kind of a Deion Sanders style a high step. It really was. Steve Hollins talking about some of the problems with TikTok. Yeah, I have seen some of that. For sure, although that's probably Nick Winston. Oh, yeah, so yesterday I tweeted this thing about this Fox Sports graphic. So they had like Mario Cristobal and Lincoln Riley, and then the last three coaches win national championships. Ryan Day was on there too. Hey, who you want to, if you're 5-star, where you want to go? And I just sort of made fun of the fact that Kirby Smart was not in the graphic. Fox Sports not including him because they're trying to sell these Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12 games. They don't have a contract with the SEC. That's really ultimately why Smart's not on there. But I couldn't resist the idea of poking some fun at Fox on that, and some of y'all had some fun with that. Nick, I'll look for your graphic on that because I'm sure it's a good one. I am sure it's a good one. Stephen Chavis mentioning September 19th. I'm guessing Stephen's no relation to the former Vanderbilt defensive back Corey Chavis, but September 19th is a big day for the Dogs for sure. For sure. Let's see what else. Ryan Wilbanks doing his cardio a little late today. Well, Ryan, good to have you with us nonetheless, no matter what. Michael Webb, that's pretty funny. Pretty funny. Robert Reynolds, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. We'll give you a heads up. I believe Jeff's on vacation, so you probably won't get Before the Hedge is presented by Kroger tonight, but I certainly appreciate you being a part of what we're doing here today. For sure. Let's see what else is going on. Joe Bryce says, who leads in sacks this year? Simply because he was the leader last year. I think that Amari, where am I going with this? Azeez Ojulari is probably the safest bet, although seeing a big leap from, even a guy like Trayvon Walker coming off the defensive line, you'd expect that to be someone from the outside linebacking core, but even Walker himself, I think, is a potential candidate here on this. So if I'm setting betting odds, I'll put Ojulari at the top, but, I think the door is open for one of these other guys. Georgia had a lot of guys a year ago that had 2.5 sacks. Seeing one of those guys really emerge with a lot more, I think is certainly a possibility. Certainly a possibility. Let us see whatever else. Gary Strickland also mentioned the fact that Kirby Smart, as he says, got a lot of clams in his pocket, meaning he's got a lot of money. I will take some comfort in knowing that if you're making whatever Smart's making, $7 million a year, whatever else, getting that, that public shirtless photo body is probably a little easier to come by. I would say that's probably true. Randy Hall says, who will announce Jamon Dumas Johnson's commitment since Jeff's on vacation? Connor Riley's on JDJ watch today. So if Johnson does commit to Georgia this afternoon, DawgNation will have plenty of coverage on that. And you never know, Jeff may fall out of the sky. But I know Connor Riley is on standby for what Mr. Johnson does later on. But great question. I'm glad you asked. Let me go over to YouTube here for a moment. Alrighty. Let's see how. Thought the Kirby Smart stuff on Newman off the top was pretty fun here today. Stephen Venanzi says, curious about your thoughts on the quarterback battle for 2021. If you had to select a front runner now, who would your choice be? It'd be JT Daniels. And that's with all due respect to Mathis and Beck or even, Brock Vandegrift. But if you give me the choice of, let's say, a guy like Vandegrift just entering into college and a guy like Daniels at that point in time will have been around for a while. Remember, the age that Joe Burrow brought to the table for LSU, I think, mattered. I think it really helped him in terms of having the success he enjoyed a year ago. This was a young man's position for a while. A lot of freshmen were having great success. Burrow kind of changed some of that for LSU a year ago. So that same level of experience potentially for Daniels, assuming he's here and everything else, that same level of or a similar level of experience for Daniels potentially in 2021 would really matter to me there in that regard. Samuel Mays asks a good question. He says, would you rather lose in Tuscaloosa but win the SEC, or win in Tuscaloosa and lose the SEC? So obviously you got a choice of winning the SEC. That's the choice you take because you're just not leaving out the SEC champion from the college football playoff. But Samuel, the question that you asked leads me to something that I talked to Connor Riley about yesterday, that of all the regular season games that Georgia plays, the one that could validate Georgia as an at-large candidate for the college football playoff more than anything else would be by beating Alabama and Tuscaloosa. If we assume for a moment, this is no easy assumption, but if we assume for a moment it's a normal college football year and Tuscaloosa is a hostile place to play and kind of everything that goes with that, if we make those assumptions for a moment, really Georgia beating Alabama and Tuscaloosa is a more challenging win than beating Alabama in a neutral site where you got half the fans and it's a little bit more of a, kind of an antiseptic environment, at least in comparison to playing at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Now, the committee would treat it the exact opposite. They would reward Georgia more for beating Alabama and Atlanta because that's just conventional wisdom, and they don't really depart from conventional wisdom very much. But in terms of what actually validates Georgia more, winning the game in Tuscaloosa would be an example of that. So it's one reason why we kind of got into the thing yesterday about Georgia's most important game. This is one of those things where I can kind of argue both sides, and ultimately I'm not sure the answer really matters all that much. But my argument for why Alabama might be Georgia's most important game is if Georgia wins that game, kind of runs the table with the rest of them, lose the SEC championship, then at that point in time, it'd be hard for me to imagine anyone has a better at-large case to make the college football playoff than Georgia would. Any conference champion, I would put Georgia's resume up with anybody on that. If you play Alabama twice and split with them and beat everybody else, then you are clearly one of the four best teams in the country. It doesn't mean that the committee would reward Georgia that way, but in terms of the cut and dry argument, even for a lot of Georgia fans in 2018 that were sympathetic to the case that Georgia may be one of the four best teams, but just kind of had a hard time arguing coming off of a loss to Alabama, boy, I would say that you'd have a lot more credence to make that case in 2020. Ultimately, it may still fall on deaf ears, but in terms of really having a strong argument, the kind of thing that you just don't relent from, if you were to win in Tuscaloosa, you'd have a pretty good case of calling yourself one of the four best teams in the country, whether you won the SEC or not. Let's get a couple of more here just for a moment. Wayne Haynes says that Zamir's better when they pitch the ball to him versus handing it to him standing still. That's kind of an interesting take for sure. Tristan West says we really need Trayvon Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Julian Rochester to step up and help Jordan Davis stymie the running game. Only then will we be able to unleash our lethal pass rushers. I understand where you're coming from, Tristan, but I was actually very happy with Georgia's success in stopping the running game a year ago. I thought this Georgia group became really good in that regard. You're right. I think that Jordan Davis is the best of that group. But I have very little what's what I'm looking for? Very little concern that the Georgia rush defense won't still be really strong this upcoming season. I just think it's imperative that you add to that. If you're going to go back and look at 2018, before Davis kind of came into his own at Georgia, that was a Georgia rush defense that was not great against the run. You had problems against Alabama. You had problems against LSU. Georgia was giving up too many rushing yards. Even really in 2017, in games that truly mattered, the game at Auburn, for instance, in 2017, Georgia gave up some rushing yards. Georgia hasn't always been a perfect rush defense in the Kirby Smart era, but certainly 2019 was a big step forward in that regard. I would assume that those gains a year ago hold over and are retained here for the upcoming season, but you got to add those dynamic plays, I think, to go along with that. Bama Boy says to win in T-Town, you have to have an elite quarterback. Well, first of all, not many people have won in Tuscaloosa at all, at all, really. And maybe you're right, G. Grace. Maybe you do have to have the elite quarterback. I continue to be of the belief that when it comes to Jamie Newman, let's say he's the starter just for right now. I think Newman being good, and I would say that last year, a lot of the time, Georgia's quarterback play was less than good. If Newman is good, then I think that Georgia can, as a team, still be great. Still have the chance to have a, certainly, upper tier offensive line. Certainly have a chance to have an upper tier running game. Have a chance to be better at the wide receiver spots. Defense expects to be excellent. You don't need Jamie Newman to be Joe Burrow. You really don't. Burrow had the huge performance, obviously, in Tuscaloosa a year ago, but I would say that's not the only blueprint for winning at Alabama. If you hold Najee to a relatively, manageable number, if you get your own running game going in a big way, if Newman makes some big throws when he needs to, I think that can be a recipe for beating Alabama and Tuscaloosa. It's not easy. It'd be much easier to have, someone go in there and throw a gazillion touchdowns the way that Burrow did a season ago. But honestly, there's just not going to be that many players that have the Joe Burrow type season. So I don't think what Burrow did in Tuscaloosa a year ago is the only way that you can beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. I don't. Mark Abe, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that, man. That's very nice to hear. Thank you. Dennis Wilson says, I just dropped by to let you know that Georgia's going to underachieve and go 10-2 this season. Well, Dennis, thanks for the heads up on that. By the way, congratulations to Miami, or best of luck to Miami at some point in time trying to go 10-2. Hopefully you guys can find that level of success at some point in time, but we appreciate you stopping by. Christopher Wilson says, what will it take for Sanford to become a consistently hostile environment? I know it can be for certain games, but how do we make it a place where every single opponent is scared to come in? So I would make the case, Christopher, and maybe different people feel different about this, and we're getting late on time, but I would make the case that Sanford Stadium's atmosphere has gotten way better over the last few years. And you said, hey, it's great for some games, not as great for others. I think that one of the things we misunderstand sometimes is that other stadiums aren't always as loud as you see them be when maybe Georgia comes to town. I'll give you a perfect example of this. When we were in Baton Rouge a couple of years ago for the regular season game against LSU, I overheard a conversation where someone said, hey, is this the most opposing fans you've ever seen in the stadium at any time? Obviously, Georgia had about maybe as many as 20,000 fans in Baton Rouge there that day. Georgia obviously has a reputation for traveling. And the LSU fan said, yeah, I guess it is, but the honest truth is this is also more LSU fans than I've seen in the stadium in quite some time. That, LSU is not just like packing the rafters and making Death Valley feel the way that we kind of think of Death Valley feeling in every single game prior to that. I would say that we've heard Nick Saban complain before about the atmosphere for some of the games against lesser opponents that Alabama plays where they're winning 40-0 or whatever else. That the divide between what a big game feels like at Georgia and what the lesser games feel like is, I think, fairly common across college football. For the big games themselves, I really don't think that Georgia takes a backseat to very many people on this. I know that there's sometimes Georgia fans kind of knock the music that gets played over the public address or, various things like that. But, I mean, I'm lucky enough I get to go to a lot of these stadiums. I'll put the atmosphere for a big-time Georgia game up against really anybody. Now, when I was a kid, I really don't think that was the case. When I was a kid, I kind of thought of Sanford Stadium as being, now I probably think about this more now in retrospect than I thought at the time, but to me, Sanford Stadium, back in the sort of pre-2002 early Richt days, was a little bit like Wrigley Field in that people came to Georgia for the atmosphere. The tailgating was great. And sometimes you saw this, people a little bit late to get into the stadium, and in some cases maybe a little early to leave the stadium because they wanted to get back and enjoy the tailgating. And Athens just kind of had this friendly confines vibe of, oh, it's a great place to be on a Saturday, but it wasn't necessarily hostile territory for an opposing team to come into. I think that some of that changed. Now, there was a while in the kind of the late Richt era, maybe, certainly 2016, where Georgia wasn't defending its home field, well enough. It was losing some home games, but other than the South Carolina loss, a year ago, Georgia's done much better in terms of defending its home turf, and I would say the atmosphere has contributed to that. So I know that there are some Georgia fans who say that the Georgia atmosphere is not what it should be. I would say more often than not, it's actually pretty good. So I understand where you're coming from with your question. My answer is I think that the atmosphere is actually probably better than sometimes it's given credit for. Joel Moody says in terms of what's seen on TV, ESPN, CBS need to show it more so that fans watching on TV can see it. Maybe that's true. Keith Fold, who's been a season ticket holder for a long time, says Sanford in the Dooley days was more of a wine and cheese crowd, not anymore. I was young back then. I didn't start going to games on a regular basis until like the mid-'80s, but that was kind of the experience looking back on it that I feel like I sort of saw. Now, back then you had the fans in the upper level that throw the cups when Georgia scored a touchdown, so that's not exactly wine and cheese, but for the most part, I know what you mean. There was a little bit of that just kind of fanciness of the crowd a little bit sometimes. I think that's probably true. Chad Williams checking in from Destin. Chad, thanks for being here. Gerald Harmon talking about the way in which the Georgia offense needs to help the defense. Gerald, I think you're right about that. Christopher White says he'll take 80% of Joe Burrow. I think I'd probably agree with that. I think I probably would. Mitch Markman says Newman's size, running ability, I think he pulls it down and we beat Alabama because of it. Boy, that'd be fun to see. Can you imagine how much of a hero Jamie Newman would be late September if he goes on the road, beats Alabama with his legs? My gosh, you have to build the statue right away. And I'm saying that only half kiddingly. Jonathan Moore says we may not have fans. Yeah, that's unfortunately, I guess, a thing that's still out there, isn't it? Probably true. Nature Gator says would love for Georgia fans to experience the Swamp. Yeah, I'm kind of two minds on this. I'm a huge fan of playing the game in Jacksonville. That's where I want to see it remain. Honestly, a chance to play Florida in the Swamp would kind of be cool too, I guess. So I'm a hypocrite on this. I don't want the game to leave Jacksonville, but I wouldn't mind playing in Gainesville sometime. I have to say that. Ben Dixon says, we'll make this our last comment. He says, is 2020 the year we bring out the black jerseys again? We need another blackout. I'm sure the players would love it. The atmosphere would be awesome in Athens. So the other day, I was kind of messing around with my son. We're just like looking at YouTube videos, and for some reason, we were watching the 2007 Georgia-Auburn blackout, and it did bring back some really good memories. I've said before, I don't like that as a motivational ploy necessarily, but when you're watching that video of what was like on the CBS telecast with all those fans dressed in black, with Georgia dressed in black, all the dancing, Vern and Gary doing their dance up in the booth, it was good fun. And ultimately, that's what college football is about. I mean, we're going to really, really try to have as much fun as we can possibly have this season one way or another. We are not going to let the Anton egos of college football get us down. We're going to try to have as much fun as we possibly can. And honestly, black jerseys being a part of that, yeah, why not? Just wear them, man. Black out Auburn if you want to. Black out whoever else. Let's just try to find a way to have some fun. I kind of agree with that. Chili Vic checking out. We'll check out here as well. We appreciate all of you being a part of this on DawgNation Daily here today. Thank you so much for, I think, some really good comments. Let me also remind you about my friends at the AJC. On the way out the door, you can check in there and find out all about your Atlanta news now. The return of sports, kind of everything that's going on with all of that. You can check that out and stay up to date on everything going on there. Also, the return of schools. Atlanta school district trying to return. There's some interesting news on that up there as well, and some news on, if you like, the Six Flags Whitewater, things like that. They're kind of doing some different stuff, expanding their normal operating time a little bit deeper into the summer this year to kind of make up for the time I guess they missed. You can read more about that online at ajc.com as well. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that. for you. The water heater goes out. In many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Big thanks to them for making this portion of the show possible. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.